Hello, welcome everyone. Delighted that you could join us for this celebratory occasion for the book launch for Ujjal Dosanjh of The Past is Never Dead. My name is Am Johal. I'm the director of SFU's Vancity Office of Community Engagement. I just wanted to begin by recognizing that we're on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples and the importance of post-secondary institutions and arts and cultural organizations to advance the cause of reconciliation. We're really delighted to be partnering with the Dhahan Prize today for this book launch. Here to welcome Ujjal back to SFU. He, of course, is a graduate of SFU before he went to that other university in Point Grey. We, of course, know Ujjal as the former Premier of BC and a federal health minister, but strangely, you know, a lot of events start in the South Asian and the Punjabi community. Of course, there's always a family relation in a kind of way. My Fuffard, my father's sister's husband, is an old friend of Ujjal's from Bedford in the UK, which is partially where this novel is set. We're really excited that you could join us this evening for this book launch. Our office has done about 800 public events, mostly free of charge, around social and environmental justice, around arts, culture, and community. So please do check out our events and come join us for other free public events. I wanted to introduce the moderator who we're partnering with, Barj Dhahan from the Dhahan Prize. Barj has a very long CV of very impressive accomplishment, including running a group of companies, the Sandhurst Group. But in 2013, he also founded the Dhahan Prize for Punjabi Literature, who's the organization we're partnering with today. So please join me in welcoming Barj Dhahan.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you, everyone, for coming out this evening. I think it's going to be an exciting conversation that we will have with Mr. Dosanjh. A little bit about the Dhahan Prize. I was born in India, came here at the age of 10, and then started feeling as I was growing up, going through universities. We have the Giller Prize, we have the Governor General's Award, and many other literary prizes in Canada. Why aren't there any big prizes in India and Pakistan's indigenous languages? And Punjabi, having been spoken here now in BC for nearly 125 years, I really felt there was a need to do something to recognize the 1,000-year-long history of Punjabi literature and new works that are being produced around the world. So thus, in partnership with UBC, we launched the prize. It is the richest prize in Punjabi literature, but it also happens to be the richest, from a monetary standpoint, prize in all of India and South Asia's indigenous languages. And we're looking forward to our 10th awarding ceremony this November 16th, and I'll be sending some of you invitations. That event will not be free. It will have a fee. I've gotten tired in our large South Asian Indo-Canadian community doing everything free. And people have come to expect that everything is free. Well, I'd encourage you to buy Ujjal's book, read it, buy more, share it with others. That's the only way literature touches people's lives. I want to take a couple of moments to introduce Mr. Dosanjh. He has a remarkable story. His life journey is fascinating. I would suggest inspiring to both immigrants and those born in Canada and people around the world. I am not sure when exactly he was born. Inside this book, there's a brief bio and it says he was born in 1946. But in Wikipedia, it says he was born on September 9, 1947. That's a mere 25 days after the painful division of Punjab, forcing the largest migration in human history and leading to untold misery and suffering, with upwards of 2 million people dying in a matter of 6-7 months. Now, I guess one of the things that Mr. Dosanjh could do today is really tell us how old he is and when he was born. Ujjal grew up in Banjhan Kalan, a village which happens to be 17 kilometers away from my birth village. Of course, he is much older, as you can see, than me. As a teenager, he emigrated to England, and 4 years later, he arrived in Canada. That's in 1968. He was 18 then. During his time in England and in Canada, he worked doing various kinds of manual labor jobs, including working at a mill at the foot of Marine Drive and Cambie, I believe. And later, of course, I was to follow in his footsteps. I also worked at that mill. After going to Langara College, he graduated from SFU and later from the Faculty of Law at the University of British Columbia. He ended up establishing his own law firm, which I believe still continues, and your sons have taken over and other partners. He is best known as a lawyer and politician. He was first elected as the MLA from the Vancouver Kensington riding in 1991 with the New Democratic Party. He served as the Attorney General of British Columbia from August 1995 to February 2000 as Kismet, which means luck or destiny would have it. Premier Glenn Clark resigned in 1999, and Mr. Dosanjh, being a politician, took this opportunity that came his way, and he announced his own candidacy for the leadership of the NDP and won the leadership vote. He became the first Indo-Canadian provincial leader and the 33rd Premier of British Columbia until 2001, when the NDP lost the provincial general election. He joined the Liberal Party of Canada some years later and served as MP from Vancouver South for 7 years. For 2 years, he served as the Minister of Health from 2004 until 2006. In 2003, he was awarded India's Pravasi Bhartiya Samman. It's the highest honor conferred to overseas Indians, especially those who have come to serve in public office or for the greater good. Throughout his life, he's had a keen interest in politics, in literature, and writing. In 2016, his biography titled Journey After Midnight, India, Canada, and the Road Beyond was published. I have read it. It's a good book. I encourage you to go and buy that and read it too. In my estimation, and I think I'm pretty good in estimating because I'm a student of political science, history, and literature, and politics. So in my estimation, he has been a courageous and principled leader, both as a politician and an activist for social justice. Unafraid in the face of threats and violence, he has stood firm and spoken his mind. This is a rare quality among those who are in politics. And I think for that, I have this immense respect for Mr. Dosanjh. For those of you who do not understand Punjabi, his name has a beautiful and fitting meaning. You know what Ujjal means? It means pure, shining, shimmering, glorious. Please welcome Mr. Dosanjh, a devoted husband, father, grandfather, and now an emerging writer of fiction with his debut novel, The Past is Never Dead. He will speak, then we'll have a dialogue afterwards.
All right. Confessions first, right? I am going to be 77 on October 14, which means I was born on October 14, 1946. That's the real date of birth. My father recorded it as an annual register every year, transferring all the important dates, but lying all the while to schools and other places. There used to be mass lying by educated parents in those days, particularly in the case of boys, because they wanted the boys to be able to write all the competitions with lower age, because there's an age limit, right? So anyway, that's that. I am going to be 77. There you are. Thank you, Barge. I have to thank Barge, truly, and in front of you. When I approached the Vancouver Sun, Dana G, for a review, she asked me whether I was going to do a book launch in BC. I said, we did that in India a couple of times, and it's published in India, foreign publisher. Maybe not, right? So, but I had bumped into Barge at a wedding function somewhere. Among Indians, wedding functions galore. So we had a few drinks, and I told him I was going to India. He said, I'm going to India too. I said, I'm going to come back before you do, and I'll have a book. He said, well, drop one at my place. And I dropped one at his place. Lo and behold, several weeks later, I get this call out of the blue. Aren't you doing a book launch? I said, no. I said, and I said to him, I'm actually a very shy person at heart. You won't believe that, but that's, and he said, you must do a book launch because you always do things in a way that don't promote yourself. So I want to help you do a book launch. Then I said, where? He said, Seasons. I said, how much does that cost? He said, well, that's not your problem. I said, that's nice. Anyway, he then hooked up with AM and SFU and did that. So thank you. Without you, I wouldn't have done this. I can tell you that. So I had to be brought kicking and streaming to do this. And I'm happy that you did that. All right. Now, I was told that authors usually read a little bit. I always wanted to write. I used to write Punjabi poetry, and my father kind of, threw them in the well when I was in grade 8. He said, you'll die of poverty. Poets never make any money. And I gave that up, and then I went to England in 1969, and I started writing poetry, Punjabi poetry again. And I have 300 to 400 Punjabi poems sitting around my home that I've written at various times. And one day, with the help of somebody, I might put them together. Some of them were published a long time ago in some of the Punjabi magazines. But in 1983, I wanted to write a novel. So I took a typing course. In the first week or so, the other students were like 100 pages ahead of me, and my fingers didn't do the walking, as they say. And so I quit, and then 84 happened. The rest is kind of history. I got involved, and one thing led to another, and never wrote. After I wrote my autobiography, some friends, I was already writing a novel, but one of the friends said to me, when I read your autobiography, sometimes it feels like prose, sometimes it's verse, sometimes it's poetry. So I kind of laughed in my own mind. I'm a politician. We deal with fiction all the time, right? So, but that was Amarjit Chal. And I told him, after he said that, I'm already into the first novel. But this is the second novel to be published first, rather than the first, because I had to get some training with respect to the first, and it got finished second. And that's coming. There are 2 or 3 other novels in queue to be published. Publishing is a very difficult area. I talked to some couple of agents. People were kind to introduce me to some of the agents. And I sent inquiries, submissions, no answer. I think I must have done 4 or 5. And then I just decided, I will go back to my Indian publisher who had also published the autobiography in India. It was published here by Figure One, who don't do fiction. But the Indian publisher does fiction as well. So I sent him this novel first, being a shorter novel, and he said he'll publish it. That's how it came to be published, and I was very happy. So I'll read you the prologue, which is a couple of pages, and then we'll, Our ancestors would slaughter you people at the altar. Our orders were to kill you. Remember that, said the voice, as if they had done him a favor by letting him live. That voice, the only voice that had spoken to, or rather at him, had constantly hurled obscenities for what seemed like 2 days now. The vehicle in which they traveled sounded and felt like a small delivery van. It eventually dumped him on a gravel road, as the voice had instructed its companions. After a few minutes of lying inert, counting to 200 and not to 1,000 as he'd been told, he removed his blindfold and opened his eyes and realized that he was several miles away from home. In the dark and cold winter night, he walked through the fields, bushes, and across the shortcuts. His limbs were near frozen. He found the payphone he had remembered seeing earlier once by the roads he was on now and called a taxi, which took him home to 2 St. Leonard's Avenue, Bedford. Once in his room, he wrapped himself in blankets, sat on his bed and looked out. Across the street, beyond the 4-foot-tall brick wall, stood the deserted St. John's railway station and a red telephone booth near its entrance. He had used the telephone there scores of times. His ears remembered the clanking of the coins falling through the slot. The steadily falling snow appeared less than white, discolored. The station lamppost shone dim, much dimmer than usual. He prayed for a storm, a rainstorm, a typhoon, earthquake, snowstorm, any storm, anything, something to wash everything away. After a mysterious disappearance of over 24 hours, he had just returned home. "Everything all right, son? Can I come in?" said Udo, after knocking on his bedroom door, his voice muffled. Kalu heard the lump in Udo's throat. He jumped out of bed and locked the door. "No, Papa, I'll see you in the morning. I've already told you everything is all right," he said, clutching the doorknob tightly in his right hand. His hand touched one of his turbans hanging by the hook on the door. His body trembled as he turned to look at the mirror on the dresser. He thrust his clenched fist into it. The mirror cracked, but no shards fell off. "Son, what was that noise? Everything all right?" Kalu put his hands on his heart, afraid his father would hear its agitated pounding. He knew his father hadn't believed a word he had said. The countless fragments of the fractured mirror reflected his naked body, dissected by the cracks. His hands moved from his heart to his head. The touch felt odd to his hands. He looked into the mirror again. It showed no hair on the face, the head, and the rest of the body, except at the crotch and some by the armpits. His legs wobbled under him. His hands moved to feel his neck and its hair less small. He noticed the marks of the turban on his forehead. His facial skin that normally hid under his turban was lighter compared to the darker brown on the rest of his face. The black birthmark on the left side of his forehead stared at him. Without the Sikh turban, the hair on his head and beard, the birthmark was visible, and his Chamar hood felt exposed. In the corner of his eye, he could see the solitary bulb hanging from the wire on the ceiling. He thrust his fist into his eyes and turned away from the mirror. When he dropped his fists, his eyes opened to a portion of the wall above the headboard. Framed portraits of Ravidas and Ambedkar, deemed deities for the untouchables, looked down at him. In the dim light of the ceiling bulb, they looked anything but godlike. The garlands around their necks reeked of mortality, Like nooses, they scream death. Kalu's eyes turned to the small framed black and white photo of Udo on the bedside table. He seemed to jump out of the frame, dressed as Kalu had remembered him in 1942.
We'll have a Are we on? Okay.
I was going to say one thing before. Let me do a commercial.
Sure.
Right? So, authors have to do commercials, right? Everyone here, don't just buy one book. Buy 5 for your relatives and friends and children. Spread the word. There's no money in authorship anyway, for most of us.
If you were gripped by the prologue, I guarantee you will be gripped more through the entire novel. It's a story that spans almost 35, 36 years of 2 families from 2 separate castes. Here they are in Bedford, England. It's a story where turbans are knocked off. Johnny Whiskey is drunk constantly by many characters. Samosas are eaten, chai is made, and yet there is tension. And what is the tension about? Can you tell us? What is the tension?
Well, the tension is about caste. It's about people born in a particular caste, looked down upon, and not given their due in terms of equality, fairness, and justice. And many people believe that if you leave India behind, caste will sort of stay where it is. But caste travels with people. It has traveled here. It has traveled in Britain. This is in Britain because I came to Britain in 1964. And I saw it happen in front of my very eyes. An old man who used to do hawala in those days. It was quite legal. He was retired. And a Jat man, so-called upper caste. Brahmins won't think that's upper caste, but Jats think they're upper caste. Argued with the man because the money, he said, wasn't delivered. In fact, it was delivered. We're sitting around. I had been there only a week. I had a turban on. I had a little beard on, nascent beard, and I didn't speak much English. This man, elephant of a man, walks over and slaps the old man. And nobody did anything to him other than separating them. Nobody scolded him. Nobody said, you should apologize. And I was frozen. And that was the image in my head that stayed. And that was the man that I wanted to pay tribute to. He was very close to my cousin. He was his best friend. And that was the second novel that I wanted to write. The first was about the independence movement in India, which will happen. So as I said to the Vancouver Sun, I literally cried as I wrote this because many of these things happened to my best friends.
That's in Bedford. What about you grew up, till the age of 18 before you emigrated to England? What was, growing up, what was your own personal experience of caste within your own family, in your village community?
Within my family, the experience was totally different from the experience in the community. Within my family, both in my village and in my Nana's village, my maternal grandfather's village, I was allowed to go sleep at my untouchable friends' homes. And they were allowed to come and sleep in our homes. And in fact, my best friend that is still alive in Bahawal, my grandfather's village, Bakshish Mahe, every time I go with some exceptions. I will even look him up. Like we went to Pune just to see him once many years ago, because so my personal experience was different, but I also knew there was violence, there was repression, there was oppression, there was hatred, there was discrimination, there was exclusion. I saw, people sitting on the periphery of the walls around the temples, away from the main body of the temple, even at the Sikh temples, let alone just Hindu temples. Sikhs, we kind of prize ourselves on saying Sikhism is about equality. Absolutely not. The teachings may have been, but we're not about equality.
Say a little bit about the history of caste in India, its origins, and how does it show itself in the daily lives of people even today?
Well, I'm not an expert on caste, so you go to India now, circumstances have changed. It's the economy, stupid, Bill Clinton said, right? Economy is going to change everything. You go to India and you have IPSs, IASs, IFSs, all of these services where people are from different castes. They intermarry, nobody cares. So amongst the upper classes, economically, mingling is happening, because ultimately it's all about economy, stupid, right? And part of the reason that caste has remained indelible in India is because caste grips people who are already poor into poverty, doesn't let them go. It's ultimately the economic revolution and equality that's going to deal with it.
Yeah, in fact, in the book, Udo, one of the characters, says poverty and oppression don't allow much room for free will.
Yes.
So it is about oppression. It's a system that was started a little bit over 2,000 years ago. It ranks people based on color, origin, and it's a power structure. It's the way to divide humanity, and it continues. It's in the genetic code of Indians almost, right?
Oh, it is. I mean, I was just talking to somebody yesterday. You sit around regular homes amongst the Indo-Canadians. At night when they've had a couple of drinks, the truth comes out. I mean, we talk as if so-and-so kutta Brahman, so-and-so dog Brahmin, right? So-and-so ugly Chamar, so-and-so, idiot Jat. Right? So we talk like that amongst ourselves. And I have to sometimes say to my own members of the family when they're sitting around saying that, stop it, right? Because it's not acceptable. I mean, I hate this thing because, the truth is, we never talked to our children about religion and caste until they were at university. One of them came running and said, from UBC, came around and said, Dad, are we Jats? He didn't even know how to say Jat because we'd never talked about caste. And it's the people who do agriculture, land-owning class. And I said, don't say that, they're stupid.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned when you read the prologue, there's a word in there, Chamarhood.
Yeah.
Tell us what Chamar, to be a Chamar, what that is, and what kind of work you did.
In the novel, it's set in the late 30s and early 40s in Punjab. In the novel, and as in fact many of the people who dealt with leather, they skinned dead cows, and they then treated leather and dried it up and ready for shoes and everything. And sometimes, they took meat home. Carrow, it's called in English. They took dead meat home to eat because they're poor. And that's the kind of work, not all of them. Some did that. Others worked on as seasonal labor on the small farmers or big farmers' lands, and got a portion of the grains or produce at the end of the season.
It's interesting.
Along with food while they worked.
Right. So in the caste system, the Chamars and the Chudes are at the bottom of the rung. The rung is probably 3,000
Yeah.
steps.
Yeah.
In Punjab, one out of every 3 persons in today's Punjab, Indian Punjab, belongs to the lower castes, the Dalits, as they call them now. Now, Mahatma Gandhi, during the independence movement, your grandfather was involved in that as well, as were mine. Mahatma Gandhi coined a very interesting word for these lower castes. He called them Harijans. What does that mean? And what do you think,
Well, I think-
what was his motivation behind giving this name?
Well, I think that was progress in Gandhi's time. I mean, Gandhi, I sort of believe perhaps that he didn't want to pick all the fights and didn't pick a fight on caste. Instead, he basically said, we should respect the occupations and professions and respect people equally. A bit of a dreamer in that sense, unrealistic. So he gave people the name Harijan, which means, children of God. Well, if they're children of God, then what are the rest, right? So I think that there's been an evolution from that. And now, in fact, nobody uses the word Harijan. They call themselves Dalit. Dalit means people who are oppressed. And that sort of, throws everything in contrast. Tells you what the real issues are. It's oppression, it's inequality, it's injustice. I mean, under Modi, in recent years, people who are skinning dead cows have been slaughtered and lynched because some Brahmins believed that they were killing cows and eating meat. Muslims, the cow traders, the cattle traders, they've been killed and lynched, many of them. So I think that India is a fairly unjust society right now, and it's becoming more unjust under the current regime. I have no hesitation in saying that. I love the idea of India that the freedom fighters fought for, but that wasn't the idea of Modi's India.
In the book, the broad theme is caste and how caste continues to be the dominant relationship dynamic. But now you're in Bedford, a country, people that have been used for centuries to a class system. Many there were also oppressed, didn't have rights. So here you have some intersection between caste and race and class, poverty, illiteracy, all of those things. How do you think caste is related to race and particularly color?
Well, the Sanskrit name for the caste is Varuna. I am told that it literally means color. And there is an element of color to caste. Centuries ago there was. If you believe Aryans came from Central Europe and they were white, and the original inhabitants were less than white, and there's been sort of mingling over the centuries, and some people still look white and others are sort of mixed, more like me, and others are still darker, right? In that sense, I think you have an element of color to caste, but that's sort of way in the past. What's more important about caste and class is this, and I think it's the book argues that, the novel argues that class you can fight, you can organize, you can fight, you can struggle, you can bring about equality, because there's no stamp, there's no condemnation, there's no approval of religion to class. Class is a secular phenomenon, and nobody's devised a plan to have classes. They happen because of certain greed or other things, but there's no larger book that's been written on classes. How do you create classes? Classes just happened. You can fight them, but caste, you are unable to fight unless you fight the religion that promotes it. And unfortunately, in India, no religion is exempt. There is caste among the Sikhs, there's caste among the Muslims. Muslims don't marry intercaste either. You talk to any Pakistani from my background, Jat background, I've talked to them. They said, no effing way we'll do that, right? So it's Buddhism, Jainism. I don't know about them, but Hindu, Islam, Christianity, and Sikhism. None of those three have escaped caste. Caste is embedded amongst the followers of those religions. Anybody that says to the contrary is lying.
Well, there's no difference in the United States when you look at American history, especially the slave trade. The Bible was conveniently used by white Europeans to preach the message of the gospel to the blacks, but also used against them at the same time. In 2021, Isabel Wilkerson wrote this groundbreaking book called Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. And what she's basically arguing is that caste has its roots in India. But when you look at American slavery and Nazism in Germany, a lot of the stuff in both America and in Nazi Germany, the laws that they passed, how they controlled various populations, were all based on caste. So caste is alive, it sticks with you. In the book, you've already touched upon religion, you've touched upon Sikhism. What is the significance, religious significance, and the cultural meaning of the turban in Northern Indian culture?
I think in the Indian culture generally, and Middle Eastern culture as well, turban was necessary because of the heat. And so most Hindus and Sikhs and Muslim wore turbans, males. And women had chunnis or other things to cover them. For Sikhs, it became important. It's not one of the 5 symbols. It became important because you have long hair and you have to manage them. So you tie a turban around them and that way you manage them. Other than that, I don't think turban has any meaning whatsoever. I've never come across anybody that tells me that turban is mandatory for a Sikh.
Well, so why, if a man's turban is knocked off intentionally by somebody, why does that lead to a counterattack?
Well, because a turban in the Indian culture and in the Asian culture maybe generally, but in the Indian culture, a turban is considered your honor. And that is true amongst the Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims who used to wear turbans in older times. In Rajasthan, most of the Rajputs wore turbans. Many of the old photos of Islamic followers, you see wearing turbans. Kings wore turbans. Muslim kings wore turbans. Hindu kings wore turbans. Hindu chieftains, Muslim chieftains wore turbans. So turban was a symbol of your honor. If somebody takes your turban off or knocks it off, that's an insult. But that's not a religious insult. It's a social insult.
Right. And it's that insult. Basically, the turban, the way I understand it, culturally, it represents the person's personhood.
Yeah.
And if it's intentionally knocked off by somebody, they're basically knocking that person down.
Absolutely.
When my father became General Secretary of Ross Street Temple in 1974, the opposing group that did not accept the election results, they conspired with some of my father's friends who were also on the executive with my father. They say when the new executive is going to take power, they're going to disrupt it. And what they're going to do is they're going to knock Budh Singh's, my father's, turban off to embarrass him and to basically diminish his inner strength that brought him into that role. So we see this unfolding in this book. Many times turbans are knocked and so forth. One interesting statement by one of your characters in the book is, well, in England, husbands kill wives, boyfriends kill girlfriends, jilted lovers kill anyone that rejects them, but you know, there's no one. Sorry, I can't read my own handwriting.
No father.
Oh yeah, no. Here, no one ever. Here, no one has ever heard of fathers killing their married daughters.
For marrying, yeah.
For married daughters. Why is that? Why is that sort of in Indian culture?
Well, you know, the thing about honor killing, which is nothing to do with honor, it's all dishonorable, absolutely. But killing for marrying a person from a different caste or a different stature or different religion, particularly in northwest India, it still happens. In Punjab, it happens. In Haryana, it happens slightly more. In Rajasthan, it happens. And so I think, you know, what that character is saying, that character knows the British society, that in British society, a father will never kill a woman, a daughter, for marrying someone of his or her choice. Might be angry, might not socialize with the person, but I have not heard of a father or a brother killing a woman for marrying against their wishes. And that was the point that we were trying to make, that, you know, that each society has faults. I mean, British society isn't perfect. We aren't perfect here, but some societies are more perfect than others.
Well, that's debatable. We'll leave that subject for another time. I have 3 more questions for you, then we'll open it up to the audience.
Sure.
One of them is one theme that you also explore and you touch upon, and I think you take a great deal of risk because it's a taboo subject, and that is around human sexuality, especially in the context of the one of the characters leaves India, leaves his wife and son behind, and then for 10 years, he lives in England. They're both in their probably late 20s, early 30s, and you touch upon a little bit about their own sexuality.
The woman.
The woman and also the man.
Man himself.
Man himself.
Man himself.
Visiting prostitutes in England.
Man himself goes to the red light district in Bedford. The son extracts that from the father in defense of his own mother, because he suspects that his mother, in the absence of his father, to satisfy her needs, had been seeing people. But you see, so he tries to argue with the father, saying, at least he didn't sleep with anybody upper caste or lower caste. The same caste.
Right. But it is a
because there's caste in everybody. That's the problem.
It's a taboo subject, and in literature, I would say primarily Punjabi literature that's being written in Canada and UK, this aspect of the immigrant experience has not been touched upon, has not been explored. Well, but I think you take a big risk in doing this.
Well, it was a calculated risk. I will take it again. It doesn't really bother me at all, because our culture refuses to give agency to women. We don't believe women have agency. We don't believe they should have agency. What this does is gives this woman agency to go satisfy her needs. Right?
More a personal question. You said that you came to England, you still had your turban, and I'm sure a beard as well.
Nascent.
Unlike
yours.
Emerging. When did you cut your hair and took off the turban? And what was going through your mind, your heart, your soul at that time?
Nothing.
Okay.
Absolutely nothing. I'll tell you why. Because when my father came to see me off, or took me to the airport and saw me off in the little small room that used to be. It was a small airport in those days, 1964, December 64. And he said goodbye, and I walked out. I thought that was the end of me seeing him, and he'd be gone. I walked to the plane, and near the ladder steps to the plane, they had a rope tied with a stand to cordon off some people. And as I'm walking, I wasn't looking, and he says to me, he used to call me Paikunatha Singh. He says, Paikunatha Singh, come here. And that was him. He had come to the plane, standing by the side. He said 3 things to me. He said, you're going to a foreign country. You want to have a haircut? Have a haircut. And in English, he said, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And he was a turbaned, baptized Sikh all his life. But he was liberal enough to say to me, feel free. Number 2, he said, you want to take a drink? Yeah, take a couple of drinks. Don't drink too much. If I ever see you smoke, I'll kill you. And I've never smoked.
One interesting feature I find,
And I'll tell you why it didn't bother me. I am not religious at all. I respect people's religious feelings. I am a Sikh in the sense that I was born and raised in a Sikh family. I understand Sikhism perhaps as much as the next guy, next person. But I don't judge people based on whether they believe in God or not. I don't know. I don't discuss God with people. It doesn't matter to me. That's why it didn't matter to me whether I had a haircut or not, because I always understood most Punjabis who wear turbans, they wear turbans socially, because in the old times, Sikhs were able to gain equality with the non-Sikhs more easily because Sikhism was very progressive. And most of the people who were landed gentry were Jats, right? So they wore turbans, and turbans gave them a status. So most of the Sikhs in Punjab even today, even if they have short hair, they grow this much beard and have a turban because turban gives them a social standing. And so for me, turban was just part of the social thing. And if I was, if I wasn't religious, why would I want hair?
okay, good answer, we'll accept it. Interesting, one interesting thing I noted in the book, the names of the characters. Some of the names in Punjabi, their meaning is so rich, like Amrit, meaning baptismal water. Then you have a character named Daler.
Yeah.
Those who don't know Punjabi, when you read that name in the book and that character, how he acts, you won't see that what the name means doesn't line up what the actions of the man are. In fact, they're contrary.
Isn't that true for most of us?
Yes, yeah. But that I found it interesting. So final question from me. In the Canadian context of truth and reconciliation, the oppression of the Indigenous peoples, the immigrant experiences, the role of race that still exists, and I think we can say even in Surrey, the decision or no decision around having a second hospital that wasn't made for the last 20 years. Did race, color, ethnicity play a role in that? So how relevant do you think your book is, or in what ways is it relevant for our Canadian experience today?
Well, it's relevant in many ways. I mean, caste exists among us here. Women's inequality exists among us here. Regional chauvinism exists in our minds. Caste chauvinism, race chauvinism, origin chauvinism. We all are receptacles and carriers of those kinds of things. So in that sense, the book is relevant. It may be about the 50s and 60s and 70s Britain, but it's absolutely relevant to the lives of immigrants, Indian immigrants, and those who interact with them. It's important to know. Other than that, it's from my perspective, this book, I've tried to give agency to women. The women I wrote about are strong characters. They have all the faults we have, but they're strong characters. And Kalu is a very strong character, the untouchable protagonist. And it's relevant in politics, it's relevant. It's relevant in society, but politics, it's relevant because in Kalu's experience, when he's running for a seat in Parliament in Britain, some of his compatriots, like some other Indians, are trying to tell the whites there, the Laborites there, oh, if you have him from that caste, we're not going to vote for you. All the other castes are going to vote against the Labour Party, right? And some others the white guys are saying, oh, well, you want to go canvass in this area, that's not good for you. Go canvass in the area where Indians live. That happens in this society too. So you show characters fighting that kind of pigeonholing that happens to people.
Yeah, and it
happens.
It happens. It's happening now. I think our Canadian political parties at the federal, provincial level,
my friend
civic
Mark
level.
Marison's here. He's a political strategist, and
Right.
He'll tell you it happens.
Yes, it's happening, and I think the political parties also use caste consciousness, regional consciousness, certainly among the South Asian populations across the country.
Yeah, it says we should run candidate X in such and such because he happens to be brown. A lot of brown guys in that writing, right? I mean, it's happening here too.
It's happening. The other thing that's happening is that you, in the book, you touch upon the Sikh Gurdwara scene there, where there's the Jats that have gotten together. They've opened up a Gurdwara. The Chamars have gotten together, lower castes. Well, folks, Metro Vancouver is no exception. It's happening now. Isabel Wilkerson in her book says about race and caste that they're both like a pathogen. You don't see it with your eyes, but it is alive. The pathogen is deadly. It destroys people's will, and it can lead to literal death. So thank you very much for writing this book, this conversation. Now we'll open it up to the audience. So you can just stand, please, and a mic will be brought to you. And keep your questions short.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. I saw the cover of the book. There's Union Jack, and then in front there's a white statue. Oh, who is that white statue representing? Is it us? I'm not sure. Or is it some kind of?
I didn't draw it.
Okay, that's a good answer. So my question is about the impact.
But I can tell you what it looks like.
To me or to you?
No, to me, because I wrote the novel. It looks like a young Sikh child with a bun on top of his head, male child.
Okay. So let me come to my question. What is the impact of Bollywood in terms of perpetuating caste and class? Because Bollywood is a very powerful medium of instruction. And the other question is, what is the influence or impact of Ambedkar after his death? Because he was fighting the caste system.
Who?
Ambedkar? How do you pronounce? Ambedkar.
Well, Ambedkar's legacy is lasting. I mean, it will take hours to talk about that. That will last forever. Lot of impact. He gives, just his name gives encouragement to people to fight on. What was the other question? So Bollywood. Well, Bollywood is like these other IFS, IAS, IPS, all of these service people who work for the government are rich, and some of them are corrupt. They make a lot of money and they marry each other. And same with Bollywood. I mean, Bollywood may make liberal movies. You know, in old times, they used to make movies like Avara and others, and, you know, about poverty and about those kinds of issues. Or Do Big Mean, that very few of those movies are made. Now movies are about different things. So I don't think that, you know, Bollywood has influence, but, you know, they intermarry based on, they don't care about faith or caste or whatever. But I don't think that percolates down to a regular society.
Hello. Thank you so much, Baji. You talk about caste being immigrated here amongst us. And then here we are in a class system as well. And so again, since we're having a very open conversation, I would argue that within the South Asian community, we've also embraced class here, in addition to the caste system we brought over. We have many of our friends, families, and what have you, who have made fast money based on some labor and others just because of economic prosperity. And I feel like one of the issues that's facing the South Asian community here is how do we reconcile not addressing caste and doing away with it, but also embracing the class system that exists here with new immigrants coming in and the treatment of them and those of us who've been here longer who have now done well. So I'll leave it there. I hope that question is
I don't know.
makes
look,
sense.
In terms of the class struggle, as long as there are classes, class struggle will continue. I mean, that, you know, people, you can have many labels attached to you as you go through society. You can be a capitalist, and you can be a rich landlord, and you can be a so-called high caste person. You think of yourself as such. So one individual can have all of those kinds of roles or feelings or positions in his own mind. It's natural if you live in post-industrial society that you're going to be, you know, there's a class system that affects everybody. It affects you, perhaps no different than the rest of society, except that your lives are more complicated because of caste.
Mr. Dosanjh, I'm Anita Huberman. I'm with the Surrey Board of Trade. I'm just over here. And
good to see you.
Good to see you. And, you know, my family has a Hindu background, and they still believe strongly in the caste system. And it is religious-based. You're so right. I'm just wondering what your perspective is on the revolutionary change that needs to happen to change that perspective and that perception. Does it start with our education system? Does it start with politicians? Like what's your perspective on that revolutionary change that needs to unite people?
Well, you know, ultimately, religion is not going to change you. It's the religion that has brought you where you are, that has imprisoned you in this division. And all the other religions carry this division in India, and then that's not going to liberate you. Politics of liberation will liberate you, but for that, you know, if you had a Nehru or a Gandhi or even a Shastri as the leader of India, or you have someone like them more modern today, rather than someone who is steeped in religiosity, which is so enmeshed and imprisoned by caste. If you run your election campaigns based on religion, based on dividing people along religious lines, you make the religious passions more intense. And those religious passions also contain the caste divisions and caste passions. So you'll have to look for leadership outside of what's happening in India. And the politicians here, I might say, I'm so sorry. Politicians here love going to minority community events. They wear their dresses, they learn a few words of their languages, they say those few words. They don't ever speak the truth to the communities. They don't ever say to minority communities, change. They say to the larger society, we have environmental problems, we have these drug issues, we have these women inequality issues. We should change these. We should revolutionize society. They never go to a minority community and say, give up this idiotic caste nonsense. Give up this women's inequality nonsense. They stand in temples and at secular podiums and make speeches, but they're absolutely meaningless. Those speeches have no meaning. And that's a problem. Our politicians, I would love politicians who make demands of themselves as well as of society. These politicians don't want to make any demands, particularly on minority communities, just in case they might be called racists. Well, if you want politicians who speak the truth, who want people to change, who want society to change, then start electing better politicians.
In fact, I would go a step further and say that when you look at Canadian scene, the country is less religious today than it was 20 years ago. Fewer and fewer people are going to places of worship. But I have rarely in my life seen Christian churches, Jewish synagogues inviting Canadian politicians on the main religious days to be on the podiums and give the speeches. But among Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims, that is a practice. Vaisakhi, yes, it's a celebration of the Sikh New Year. Surrey is home to the largest Vaisakhi parade outside of India in the world. Yet it's an opportunity for politicians to really have their photographs taken. So the community is guilty as much as we're saying that the politicians need to do more. So when politicians go into a Sikh Gurdwara that is predominantly made up of lower castes, they are, by their very presence, they're reinforcing the caste separation. So it's a tragedy. But in Canada, we've had some really remarkable politicians who have left a good example, and Tommy Douglas was one of them. Anyone else? Yes.
Brother Ujjal, first of all, just want to say thank you and congratulate you on launch of this book. This book will go long way in terms of enhancing awareness and will help organizers such as myself in terms of educating the community and also supporting the truth and reconciliation process from the caste lens. My question to you, sir, is as a former Attorney General, as a Premier of this province, as a Member of Parliament, recognizing the caste is prevalent here. Caste is prevalent in the United States. It's prevalent in England. In Seattle, state of California, legal measures are being taken to support anti-caste work. City of Burnaby has passed a motion. I'm wondering if you have any advice for us in terms of educating and influencing our local elected officials to pay more attention to the issue of caste problem here and introduce similar measures to those that are in India as well as in other jurisdictions.
Well, it would take an amendment to the Human Rights Code in BC. That's a pretty simple thing to do, to include caste as a prohibited grounds for discrimination. They should do the same thing federally. As I shared with you before, I saw this case that was decided in BC on caste grounds, awarding some damages for discrimination. And I think that should be done. There's nothing, when society changes, we invite immigrants from all over the world. They bring richness and diversity, both of good things and bad. And we should actually make sure that we guard against the bad things. And one of the complaints I have about politicians is they don't ask people to change. They don't ask people to give up the bad things. That doesn't mean we don't have bad things here already. We have enough bad things here. But, politicians aren't honest about that. But we should, in BC, ask the Attorney General of British Columbia, who happens to be an Indo-Canadian, should know the caste system. She should immediately bring forth an amendment to the legislation. It should take no more than 1 or 2 drafting days to make it happen. Similarly, federally, ask Trudeau to do it. I mean, I have lots of complaints about Trudeau. Like, one of the things he said initially in his Vogue interview after he became the Prime Minister, Canada has no mainstream. We have many streams. Well, if we have no mainstream, then we're not really a country. We really don't have a culture. We don't have values, right? There are certain values that are collective Canadian values about democracy, about freedom, about equality, about social justice, about those kinds of things. But that's the mainstream. We have it. So, that's why I'm saying we should start electing better politicians.
We've got time for 2 more questions.
Two more questions.
I ran, yeah.
Hello. Yes, my name is Loveleen. You have just talked about a political change, politicians driving change. So my question is, do you believe that a lasting social change can be led or directed by political change, or the revolution of mind, as I call it, should usher the society into a social change first? That will bring about a political change later on.
Well, it's a chicken and egg, right? You got to start somewhere. My focus is on politicians. You can have organizations rising up from the ground that involve millions of people. I mean, the freedom movement was a revolution in itself in India. Changed a lot of people, gave a lot of people a lot of ideas and ideals. Changed the country forever. And you have the current regime that's trying to take us backwards, and that's a movement in itself too. So politicians can make a lot of difference. Politicians, when you have your hands on the levers of power, you can change the society more easily. The captain of a ship can change the course ship is taking more easily than passenger, right? So, I am focused on politicians, but I've also been part of the social justice movements, and I know that they're so valuable. Without them, politicians won't act.
Last question.
Thank you so much. My name is Pranjali, and first of all, thank you so much for the really great conversation about bringing together this idea of religion, politics, which is very dominant in India for sure, and also many different other South Asian countries. But more so towards thinking about maybe young people like me who are just thinking about these issues, social issues, which might be in terms of race, class, even gender, because gender is sometimes understood as, a binary, that you are a woman or a man. And there are so many other issues that are connected with how you look, the kind of identity that you carry yourself with. So what would you say to someone who is just like me, who is a 20-year-old person who is just trying to navigate all these issues? Because I think we have talked about so many great questions, which are heavy sometimes to talk about. And it feels like you have to carry, you have this responsibility to carry these things forward. But is there some kind of hope? Is there something lighter that you would like the younger generation to, accept electing the politicians, which I think is very, very important?
I'm sort of beyond giving advice to people, but I say to people, I have never shied away from saying or doing whatever I want to do. but then you have to be prepared to accept the consequences. And therefore, follow your heart. Our languages, like my native language, Punjabi, doesn't even have the words to talk about non-binary, binary, LGBTQ issues. In one of my novels, I try to write that, and my friend is translating and is having difficulty using the regular English words such as penis and vagina. In Punjabi, there are no decent words, right? So if you are an immigrant and you living this duality, a linguistic duality, which I live, it can be the hardest thing. I can write in English much more freely than I can write in Punjabi, because English is a liberating language, because Canada's culture is partly a liberating culture. And my culture that I come from is not a liberating culture. It is the highly conformist, highly restrictive, highly constraining culture. What will people say if I do X? Like, that's what everybody tells you. It's changing. It's becoming more liberal. That's wonderful, but it hasn't changed fully yet.
Well, Mr. Dosanjh, thank you so much for sharing your life story somewhat, the makings of this book, the inspiration behind it.
Thank you.
I would say that, we must have hope, but along with hope, we must work hard to make positive changes. So one thing that you can do to make positive change is buy this book and read it. Read it, buy another one, give it to somebody else. Yesterday morning, just finishing up, yesterday morning I did an interview regarding this event on one of the radio stations. And then the interviewer then sent me a text message. He said, why doesn't the Dhahan Prize translate this book into Punjabi? Well, we might just do that. So there are some beverages back there, maybe a few snacks are left, books are there, and Ujjal is available to sign the books. So let's sell every book that's here today, okay? Thank you.